I didn't cry the way he expected. At the airport, I did what I had learned to do over the years. Measured my reactions so they wouldn't provoke correction. I let my voice tremble just enough to feel believable, let my fingers linger on his sleeve like I needed reassurance. He held me in that practiced way of his, one hand firm on my back, guiding the moment. 2 years will pass quickly, he said, as if time obeyed him. I nodded. It was easier than disagreeing. It had always been easier. He kissed my forehead, not my mouth. That detail stayed with me longer than anything else. It felt like a gesture meant for someone younger, someone who needed to be managed. I watched him walk away without turning back. That part was consistent. He never checked to see if I was still there. On the drive home, I expected something to break inside me. Some delayed collapse. But instead, there was a kind of quiet I hadn't felt before, not relief, not sadness. Just the absence of pressure. The house felt larger when I opened the door, not empty, just unoccupied in a way that felt neutral. I put my keys down, still standing in my coat, and looked at the living room. Everything was in place, the cushions aligned the way he preferred. The lighting dimmed to that specific level he insisted was easier on the eyes. Even in his absence, the space held his decisions. I walked to the dining table and sat down without turning on the lights. For a long time, I didn't move. I let the quiet settle properly, without interrupting it. Then I opened my phone. There wasn't a single dramatic revelation. No message that changed everything in one instant. It had been accumulating for years, small inconsistencies I had trained myself not to examine too closely. Conversations that didn't quite align. Financial decisions explained in broad, confident terms that discouraged follow-up. The assignment in Toronto had been presented the same way. Vague but authoritative, temporary but necessary. He had spoken about it as though it were already decided, and my role was simply to understand. I had nodded then too, but something about the timing had stayed with me. The way he avoided specifics. The way he dismissed my questions, with a kind of patient irritation, as if I were slowing down an inevitable process. That night, sitting alone in the dim room, I opened the files I had quietly gathered over the past few months. Bank statements, email fragments, a lease agreement in a different city, not Toronto. At first, I had told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There always had been. But the explanations were becoming harder to construct and easier to see through. The assignment wasn't temporary, and it wasn't entirely professional. I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of shock, but to steady something more subtle, the instinct to minimize it. To reshape it into something manageable. Instead, I let it remain what it was. Clear. The next part wasn't impulsive. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt administrative. I transferred the money in 2 steps, not because it was necessary, but because I needed to feel each part of it happen. The savings account we had built together, though. Together, had always meant something uneven. His income, his decisions, his framing of what was smart or secure. My name had always been there, quietly, like a formality. That night, it stopped being a formality. The confirmation screens were plain. No dramatic language. Just numbers shifting from one place to another, as if they had been waiting for instruction. When it was done, I didn't feel powerful. I felt precise. Filing for divorce was even quieter. The office was nearly empty when I went in the next morning. Fluorescent lighting, neutral walls, a waiting area that smelled faintly of paper and cleaning solution. It was the kind of place where decisions became official without ceremony. The clerk didn't look surprised. She didn't ask for my story. She simply checked the documents, stamped them with a practiced motion, and slid them back toward me. "This will be processed within the standard timeline," she said. That was it. No acknowledgement of what it meant, no recognition of the years that had led to that moment. Just a system accepting input. But something shifted there, unmistakably. For the first time, the situation existed outside of him. Outside of his explanations, his framing, his control over the narrative. It was now documented, structured, and moving forward without his involvement. I walked out of the building into the same kind of daylight that had filled every other day of my life. Nothing about the world had changed. Only the terms. He called that evening. I let it ring longer than usual, not as a tactic, but because I needed a moment to decide how to answer. When I picked up, his voice was exactly as I remembered, steady, confident, slightly impatient beneath the surface. "I landed," he said. "Everything's fine here." I could hear the assumption in it, that I would respond with relief, with questions, with the familiar pattern of engagement. Instead, I said, "I know." There was a pause. Small, but noticeable. "I'll call you later," he continued. "Things are a bit hectic right now." Another pause, as if he expected me to fill the space. "Okay," I said. He hung up first. I sat with the phone in my hand, listening to the silence that followed. It felt different now, not imposed, chosen. Over the next few days, messages came in, brief, controlled, occasionally edged with irritation when I didn't respond the way I used to. There were questions about the accounts, about the house, about why certain things no longer aligned with his expectations. I answered only what required an answer. When the legal notice reached him, his tone changed. Sharper. More direct. "This isn't how these things are handled," he said during one call, his voice tightening around the edges. I didn't argue. "It's already being handled," I replied. Another pause, longer this time. "You're making a mistake." It was a familiar sentence. He had used it in smaller ways over the years, guiding my decisions, narrowing my options. But now, without the context that had always supported it, it sounded incomplete. "I understand," I said. And I did, just not in the way he meant. The process moved forward without drama. There were no confrontations, no scenes where everything was laid out in a single, cathartic exchange. Just documents, timelines, and a steady progression toward an end that felt less like an ending and more like a redefinition. The house changed slowly. I adjusted the lighting first. Brighter than he liked. It made the space feel less controlled, more exposed. Then the furniture, small shifts in arrangement that disrupted the symmetry he preferred. Each change was minor. None of them would have justified an argument on their own, but together, they altered the atmosphere. I didn't rush anything. There was no urgency. One evening, weeks later, I stood in the living room again, in a space that was still recognizably the same, but no longer entirely his. I tried to locate a feeling of victory, something definitive that would mark the transition. But there wasn't one. What I found instead was a kind of unfamiliar steadiness. Not happiness. Not even relief. Just the absence of something that had been constant for so long I hadn't noticed its weight, until it was gone. The future didn't feel open in a hopeful way. It felt unstructured, uncertain. But it was mine in a way it hadn't been before. And for now, that was enough.